Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Football Counsel. Luis Nunez here. Today, we're going to talk about buyout clauses and liquidated damages clauses. And to that effect, I'm joined, as usual, by Dr. Pablo Bruera, an expert in football law, as well as a president and founder of Derechos del Fútbol and Football Counsel. So without further ado, we're just going to dive into the topic, right? So for this, we have tried to we wanted to give you some historical background or context that will help us understand, in this case, liquidated damages clauses better. So these two cases that we have chosen, one is known as the Webster case, and the other is known as the Matusalem case. They set out later on actual dispute resolution chamber and CAS jurisprudence in regards to compensation for breach of contract and termination of contract without just cause. So let's go over the Heart of Middletonian and Andrew Webster case. Andrew Webster is a former Scottish professional player who joined Heart of Midlothian in 2001 and signed a 4-year deal in 2003. Later, the club tried to renew the contract. The player wouldn't have it, but what he did was he unilaterally terminated the contract outside the protected period and subsequently joined Wigan Athletic in August 2007 without paying compensation to Hearts. It is said that he kind of evaluated how much he was going to pay because of the breach and decided to breach the contract because in financial terms, it makes sense to him. In turn, Hart filed a claim before the FIFA Dispute Resolution Chamber seeking compensation for breach of contract by Webster. The DRC ruled that Webster indeed breached the contract without just cause, ordering the player to pay the amount of 625,000 British pounds in compensation and also find Wigan jointly liable for the breach of the contract, pursuant to Article 17.2 of the RSTP. So the decision was appealed, and on January 30, 2008, CAS rendered its decision and decided that Webster had to pay Hearts the value. This was the criteria, guys. The value of the remainder of his contract with the club. That is the sum of 150,000 British pounds plus his interest, also finding Wigan jointly liable. So as you can see, the amount to be paid dramatically was decreased because of the criteria chosen. What happened? What is the importance of this case at the time? Well, at that time, it gave a lot of people in the football community the idea that maybe a player could estimate how much it would have to pay in case of a breach of a contract by just paying the remainder of the value of the contract. So that didn't serve well to one of the most important principles of contractual regulations in FIFA, which is the principle of contract stability, because it basically in the people that support this idea, this was an incentive to breach the contract because it makes financial sense. So along came Matusalem, right? And this changed everything, guys. So the Matusalem case, it was against Shakhtar Donetsk. I don't remember the first name of the football player, but he was a Brazilian player. So just like the Webster case, it addressed the contract termination and compensation in football transfers. Matusalem also unilaterally terminated his contract with Shakhtar Donetsk in 2007 and subsequently joined Real Zaragoza. Shakhtar, in turn, demanded compensation in the amount of 25 million euros, from Matusalem and Zaragoza, and that this is the reason why it decided to sort out for 25 million euros. In the contract between Shakhtar Donetsk, and Matusalem, there was a buyout clause for that amount of 25 million euros. So the club tried to make equal they tried to turn this buyout clause into a liquidated damages clause, and later on we're going to find out that CAS wouldn't have it. So CAS raised compensation ordered by FIFA DRC to euro 11.85 million euros, sorry, plus interest.
The name of Matusalem is Francelino? Francelino, yeah. Matusalem?
Yeah, maybe Francelino, I don't remember, but I do know that this is sad because it made the player almost a slave to payment to the club. So, okay. So what is the most important aspects of this award? CAS established without a shadow of a doubt that if a party breaches a contract and then the contract is terminated because of that breach, it will have to pay financial compensation to the non-breaching party. That's the way it's gonna be from now on, no doubt about it. Then the criteria, even if it's not in the protected period, that's another whole thing, we're gonna talk about it later on. So the CAS criteria for compensation were the lost services of the player, the salary expenses, and the player's status and behavior. These last criteria are because of the specificity of sports. The player was a named captain of the team. It's not a regular player, it's a special player, right? And the behavior, why? Because if I recall correctly, the team was about to enter the first phases of the UEFA Champions League or some important competition, and he left the club during that time and subsequently joined Real Zaragoza. So the CAS panel interpreted this behavior as a conduct of bad faith on the part of the player. So in consequence, it held Matusalem and Zaragoza jointly liable for the amount of 11,858,934 euros plus interest. Again, what happened with this? This criteria recognizes the principle that is the most important principle right now, or the most important principle recognized in current CAS jurisprudence, which is the principle of positive interest. This principle basically states that one should put the non-breaching party in the position it would be in if the contract wouldn't be breached and would be complied with. So that's the analysis that the panel has to make. Put the non-breaching party in the position it would have been if the contract wasn't breached. So in this case, the most important clear factor is that it signified a shift back towards clubs' rights and contractual stability, softening the perceived player power post-Weber ruling. That is to say, now the players and the clubs also, but in this case, the players, they have to be very, very careful because now we don't know how the amount is going to be if we breach a contract. And I think that's the way FIFA likes it because it works as a deterrent for people to try to breach the contracts, and it strengthens contract stability principle. So, buyout clauses and liquidated clauses. What is a liquidated damages clause? Well, it is a contractual provision that stipulates a predetermined amount of damages to be paid by one party to the other in the event of a specified breach of contract. So basically, it is the consequence for the breaching of a contract, what it estimated. It estimates the amount to be paid in case of a breach of a contract. That is what is a liquidated damages clause. This is established in a contract and is intended to reasonably estimate the actual damages that would result from the breach, thereby providing certainty and avoiding the need for costly and uncertain litigation to determine damages. Again, after the Matusalem ruling, we got no certainty in the amount to be paid for damages in case of breach. So a good practice would be to put a liquidated damages clause in the contract for at least mitigate some of that uncertainty, because we will see again that either the dispute resolution chamber or FIFA can change, can increase or decrease the amount to be paid and has compensation. But in principle, we got a ballpark on how much money we're gonna pay. Yeah. So in turn, a buyout clause is a contractual provision also that grants one party, typically the player, the unilateral right to terminate the contract prematurely by paying a specified amount of compensation to the other party, usually the club. It's very different, guys. The liquidated damages was the consequence for breaching a contract. This is not a breach of contract. This is a right, a contractual right for a player to early terminate the contract if first it pays an agreed upon sum of money to be released from the contract. So it's actually compliant with the contract by paying the amount of money. It's not a breach of contract. The compensation amount is predetermined also and agreed upon at the time of contract negotiation and is intended to reflect players' market value or a mutually agreed upon valuation. We're gonna come back to that when we talk about the pros and the cons of a buyout clause. So here we are. What are the distinctions between buyout clauses and liquidated damages clauses? Liquidated damages clauses. It is a pre-estimation of damages to be paid in case of breach of contract. Can be modified by FIFA or CAS, higher or lower amounts. And also, since it's a breach of contract, sporting sanctions can be imposed for breach of contract if the breach of the contract was made in a protected period. Let's remember that the protected period can vary. If the player is 25 years or older when it signed the contract, the protected period is going to be 2 years from the signing of the contract. But if the player is younger, it hasn't reached the age of 28, the protection period will be 3 years from the signing of the contract. If the breach occurs during those protected periods, sporting sanctions can be imposed. So a buyout clause, it's not the damages that are estimated here. It is a predetermined sum of money also that is paid to the club and that gives the player the right for early termination of a contract. Again, it's a right, guys. It's not breach of contract. I'm complying with the contract when paying the amount of money. In case of complying with the terms of the buyout clause, no sporting sanctions will be imposed. It's not a breach of contract, but rather a right conferred to a party to terminate unilaterally the employment contract if compliant. So if any idea you're going to leave this live session today is the idea that one is a right and the other is compensation for damages. Crystal clear. Consequences of negotiating a buyout clause. This is going to depend on the club or the player because the difference, the interests are somewhat not different, but yeah, they're different. So for the club, the most common perceived con would be the club seemingly loses control over the player due to the fact that it's unable to refuse offers from other clubs that meet the amount agreed upon in the buyout clause. This in turn will result in less control on how a sale will take place. So if there's a buyout clause, there's basically no negotiation between the clubs. Usually the club, the engaging club is the club that's going to pay the money for the player. So basically, when he's going to pay the money, the player is able to negotiate the labor contract, the employment contract with the engaging party. So there's no need for drama, for prolonging negotiations during a transfer window and signing a player and transferring in the last 2 days. This is one of the pros actually. It's advance notice that a certain player might leave the club, therefore allowing for better replacement planning. So this is a planning and a scouting advantage. If I know a player has an attractive player, has a buyout clause, it would be wise for that club to prepare and search for other players in order to substitute or replace this player that is leaving. And again, that will, if you plan well, that will avoid situations like, last day transfers. Nobody wants to be in that position. Also, the club will know in advance how much money they will receive. Therefore, how much they can spend in new players. This also will be a budgetary advantage. This is not that common. So again, it is as well as the liquidated damages clauses, it is a good practice to include in the contracts a buyout clause. And a buyout clause is going to depend what the amount of the buyout clause is going to depend on what am I looking for with that buyout clause. And we'll come to that again. For the player, the cons. If abused, it can block or deter the player's possibility to change clubs and or improve labor conditions. Yeah, because if the buyout clause is called in Spain cláusula de rescisión, and caveat here, guys, in Spain, these type of clauses, liberation clauses, release clauses are mandatory by law. They have to be in the contract. It's not the case in most other jurisdictions, but in Spain, you have to do it by law. And what happens? You know, sometimes the buyout clause it doesn't reflect the market value of the player. So what ends up happening is that a club that might be interested in a player won't be able to pay that amount, or that amount just makes the player less attractive. So the player basically is stuck with the current club, not being able to be transferred and to improve his conditions. And since he has very too little, depending on the player, again, power of negotiation, he probably won't be able to improve his labor conditions with his current club. So it is a problem if not well negotiated. The pros for the player: if negotiated well, it gives the player more control over his professional career, no doubt. If I have a good offer and I have a buyout clause in place, the club or the player pays it, and I'm free to go to another club with better conditions. So it protects against also broken or false promises by the club. Yeah, I'm going to transfer you to such club, and yeah, I'm going to improve your conditions. Yeah, I'm going to pay you this award. No, and with a buyout clause, this is minimized. Protects the player from being a prisoner of his own talent. Again, well, Paris Saint-Germain can always come, but if you put 250 million euros as a buyout clause, there are not many teams in the world that can pay that or are willing to pay that amount, and then you end up stuck for the rest of your career, or at least your prime, in one club, right? We want the players to be happy. And lastly, can help protect a player's career progress. A good example of this is Erling Haaland. Erling Haaland, if I recall, came from Strasbourg to Borussia Dortmund. In the contract between Haaland and Borussia Dortmund, they put in place a buyout clause for 60 million euros, but that clause could only be triggered and enforced after 2 years have elapsed since the signing of the contract. These 2 years where nobody could trigger that clause allow the player to progress, to get prepared in a good club with a good competition, as the Bundesliga, but it prepared the player to calmly grow and be ready for a bigger club and a tougher competition. So after the 2 years elapsed, Manchester City triggered the clause, and the rest is history. Erling Haaland is one of the best strikers in the world, and already has been a UEFA Champions League champion. So it can also help protect a player's career. It doesn't have to be Erling Haaland, it's just a notorious example. So now some considerations in regards to Article 17 of the regulations on the status and transfer of players. Dani, ¿alguna pregunta hasta ahora? ¿Has mutado, Pablo?
Perdón, me muteé para no hacer ruido. No, que venimos bien, por lo que me dice, estamos tranquilos.
Muy bien, okay. Then we got Article 17 that governs the consequences of a termination due to breach of contract. And there can be maybe 2 scenarios to this breach of contract. Could be the scenario where one party, can be a player or a coach or a club, sorry, terminates the contract without just cause. That's one breach. But there could be another termination with just cause due to the fact that one party seriously breached its contractual obligations. So the counterparty, the complying party, is entitled to terminate that contract with just cause. These scenarios, both scenarios, entitle the non-breaching party for the payment of damages for compensation. So the consequences defined in Article 17 are potentially twofold. One, financial consequence: the breaching party will always pay financial compensation for damages. And in addition, FIFA or CAS may impose sporting sanctions on that same breaching party, provided that the breach occur again during a protected period. You already went about what is that. So, pursuant to Article 17.2 of the RSTP, the parties can agree previously on the amount to be paid in case of breach of contract. This is the express recognition in FIFA regulations of the possibility of liquidated damages clauses in contract. It doesn't need to be there because it's a general principle of contractual freedom, but it's always nice and good that FIFA expressly recognizes that possibility. So eliminates any interpretation that if it's viable or not, feasible or not. So the relevant part reads as follows. Article 17.2 of the RSTP. Entitlement to compensation cannot be assigned to a third party. If a professional is required to pay compensation, the professional and his new club shall be jointly and severally liable for its payment. This is important, guys. The amount may be stipulated in a contract or agree between the parties. That's where the possibility for liquidated damages, that's the legal background, like the legal basis, sorry, for that, the regulation basis. So the amounts agreed upon as liquidated damages shall have to be proportionate and appropriate, if not reciprocal. If not, they can be modified, reduced, or increased by the DRC or CAS. Why do I put if not reciprocal? Because the amount of the damages has to be proportionate, because then it can turn into a punitive clause, and that will be modified by FIFA, and it has to be appropriate. That means the sanction, the monetary sanction, should be conducive to repairing the damage of the non-breaching party. And it also, in some scenarios, there is CAS leading jurisprudence that says that amount should be also reciprocal. That is to say, both parties should have about the same consequences in case of breach of contract. So in those cases, the amount as set out in the liquidated damages can be modified by FIFA or CAS. So in order to determine if we're before a liquidated damages clause or a buyout clause, it is important first to analyze the wording of the clause. That will determine its nature, but it's also important to determine the intention of the parties if that wording is not clear enough. But that's the exception. We cannot deviate from the intention of the parties if that intention is clear. So the wording is important. In this regard, FIFA's commentary on Article 17 of the RSTP clarifies. The DRC and CAS are regularly called upon to establish the nature of such a compensation clause. The primary means of determining its nature is to examine the precise wording. Here it is. And they gave an example. Generally speaking, any clause that determines a set amount of compensation payable in the event of a unilateral premature termination without just cause will likely be a liquidated damages clause. If it says damages, if it says compensation for breach of contract or for terminating the contract without just cause, it usually is a liquidated damages clause. In turn, the DRC recently clarified that in the event of a breach of contract, the buyout clause will not be treated as a liquidated damages clause by analogy. This is because the basis for one clause and the objectives are different between both type of clauses. So, citing a ruling of one of the dispute resolution chamber of FIFA, it says the chamber established that no such compensation clause was included in the employment contract at the basis of the matter at stake, as the buyout clauses contained in the contract and in Annex A do not hold the nature of a liquidated damages clause, and consequently cannot be applied for the calculation of the compensation due to the claimant. In English, in Panamanian English, this is what it means. Yeah. If we have a buyout clause, we cannot substitute the nature of that buyout clause and pretend it's going to be considered a liquidated damages clause. If you have a buyout clause and you don't have a liquidated damages clause, you are subject to the general regime for termination of contract without just cause set out in Article 17 of the RSTP, because you cannot use a buyout clause as a liquidated damages clause. Basically, that's the reason. And the other way around, they're different. So we're now going to the case law we had chosen to further expand on the differences and implications of one type of clause and the other. The first one which we had chosen is a CAS award identified as 2019-8-6337 Maxim Maximov versus FIFA and FC Trakai. In the relevant parts, because it's quite thick, a contractual clause that contains the word fine is incompatible with the functioning of a buyout clause, because the word presupposes the commission of some kind of breach, whereas the execution of a buyout clause is a contractual right. Again, it's a contractual right. For a contractual clause to be considered as a buyout clause, the clause must clearly stipulate, this is important as a tip, better practice in drafting contracts. The clause must clearly stipulate the exact amount to be paid in order to validly execute the buyout clause. There have to be no doubt about the amount to be paid. That's CAS jurisprudence. And then we should put in the contract, maybe you would say, that, oh, they could be calculated in the future. No, 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 no. Let's not risk it. Let's put a set amount and that's it, because we might have trouble with some panels in CAS, even though they're not mandatory between each other. A liquidated damages clause, in turn, is a clause by means of which the contractual parties deviate from the regime to calculate damages in case an employment contract has been terminated without just cause, as provided in Article 17.1 of the FIFA regulations on the status and transfer of players, RSTP. Again, if I include in a contract a liquidated damages clause, that is what's going to govern the relationship between the parties in relation with the breach of contract. That is going to be a lot more certain, the amount to be paid, than if I subject myself to the general regime set out in Article 17 of the RSTP. Remember Matusalem, right? So the other case we have chosen as identified as award 2019, sorry, -A-6246. This is Ruslan Saerko versus FC Nizhny Novgorod and Football Union of Russia. This award was from May 27, 2020. It's very short. A liquidated damages clause is a provision by means of which the parties quantify the damages resulting from a breach of a contract as an exception to the regulatory regime that is ordinarily applied to calculate the damages in court. We spoke about this, but it's another case that reinforces this principle. If an employment contract contains a buyout clause as well as a liquidated damages clause, there is no reason to decide that the liquidated damages clause is void because the buyout clause is invalid. And this is very important. Both clauses have a different rationale or justification, and it's clear that they are separate clauses with separate objectives. One is to compensate the breach of contract again, and one is to exercise a contractual right in order to early terminate that contract. Very different, and very different consequences, as we've seen. So now we got this one. This is actually this is an accumulation of two processes. One is CAS Award 2016-8-4550, as well as award identified as 2016-8-4576. So in the relevant parts, because it's quite large, big, first, when talking about buyout clauses, the panel decided, as a result, when the contract is effectively terminated, such termination can be deemed to be based on the parties' prior consent. So it understands that the parties already gave their consent when they negotiated the buyout clause. Therefore, no breach occurs and the party terminating the contract is not liable for any pouring sanction. Since there is no breach, there is no need to impose pouring sanctions. In summary, the parties to the contract agreed that one party, usually the club, shall grant the other party, usually the player, an option to prematurely terminate the contract upon serving notice and payment of the agreed option price. And finally, these same two processes that were accumulated when talking about damages states, a contractual clause foreseeing that a player shall pay a certain amount as damages following his termination of his employment contract without just cause does not constitute a buyout clause. This is because the term damages is inconsistent with a buyout clause, since any payment to be made by the player would not be damages, but the consideration for the exercise of a contractual right or the option price. Again, I want to believe that the main idea of this live session today is that we're going to put it in the conclusions that we have right away. A buyout clause is a contractual right that gives one of the parties to terminate the contract with the payment of the agreed upon money. So it's basically, I'm complying with the contract by paying the amount of money that releases me from my contract. It is not a breach. On the flip side, liquidated damages is the consequence for breaching a contract. We estimate the amount to be paid as compensation for that breach and termination without just cause. A buyout clause, in turn, when complied with, does not give rise to the imposition of sporting sanctions because, again, it's not a breach of contract. Since the liquidated damages clause implies a breach of contract, it can give way to the imposition of sporting sanctions if terminated during a protected period. We spoke about this. Finally, we got two other important aspects that I wanted to point out. One is a liquidated damages clause can, depending on the circumstances, be modified by the DRC or CAS is found excessive or insufficient. And they're going to take into account if the agreed upon sum is proportionate sometimes, but for sure if it's appropriate and reciprocal. And finally, buyout clauses can help a player have more control over his career if well negotiated, as well as enable the clubs with a proper plan to again, plan in advance the adequate replacement of said players. That would be the most important conclusion that we can take from this live session, this presentation. I don't know if there are any questions. ¿Alguna pregunta, Pablo o Dani?
Luis, acá sería la pregunta si corresponde, es obligatorio para el Tribunal de Fútbol cuando se rompe un contrato en el periodo protegido poner sanciones deportivas o queda como a criterio dependiendo de la historia del club y todas esas cosas. No sé cómo lo ves ahí vos con la experiencia que tenés.
Qué buena pregunta, qué buena pregunta.
Pero, hacéselas en inglés para que todos la entiendan, porque si no...
Okay, the question is, if it is mandatory for the dispute resolution chamber of FIFA to impose sporting sanctions if the breach is done in a protected period. From the wording of the RSTP, one would say yes, but the practice of the dispute resolution chamber is they will apply or not. Yeah. Even at least in practice, they do it that way. But there's been, I know of a couple of CAS awards that pinpoint this situation that FIFA is being discretional about the application of a somewhat mandatory disposition in the RSTP. But to simplify your question, Pablo, they evaluate case by case and may impose it or not.
Okay. Ok, excelente. Y por último, si vos considerás que cuando vamos al Tribunal del Fútbol podemos reclamar daños. Por ejemplo, el 17 ahí te pide y te dice ante una situación de, qué sé yo, no te pagan los salarios, qué sé yo, y hay como un límite y todo eso. Entonces, ¿se podría pedir daños? ¿Vos considerás que el Tribunal de Fútbol podrían otorgar esos daños o directamente con los límites que te pone el 17 sería como una situación imposible? ¿Se entiende la pregunta? Más o menos.
A ver, ya. So, ¿me estás diciendo si se le podemos pedir daños por ruptura de contrato?
Sí.
So, okay. So the question is if dispute resolution chamber if we can go to the dispute resolution chamber and ask for some kind of compensation without having this type of clauses. So the question, the answer is yes. If you can always ask for damages, and of course you have to prove them. The problem with that, if you have no idea of what the amount is going to turn out to be, and when you appeal that decision to CAS, you got no idea if it's going to be more or less money. So the best practice again is to put a liquidated damages clause in place. So you might have a ballpark of an idea because it might be modified, but in this case, for them to modify the clause is harder because the party already agreed upon a sum. So it is the best practice.
Excellent, excellent.
So
fantástico.
So if we don't have, thank you. So if we don't have any more questions, we want to thank you. We want to thank you for participating in this live session. And of course, we want to invite you to next week's live session, which will be announced through our social media accounts and the internet. So until then, guys, please be safe. Take care.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Bye.